Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Landscape North Podcast. My name is Chris Duncan. This is episode 7. So before we get started, I'll introduce you to our guest, Coleman Ney. Coleman, welcome.
Thank you.
And before we get started with the questions, maybe you could just give a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, you're
It's a
welcome.
pleasure to be here. My name is Coleman Ney. I'm a landscape architectural designer here at Lashley and Associates. Our office is here in the Ottawa location.
Oh, nice.
We've
Okay.
also got an office in Montreal.
Yes.
We've been open for 34 years now.
34.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've been fortunate to be part of it for 3 of those years
Nice.
now. We do a really wide variety of projects. We do a lot of government work, lots of commercial and institutional, a bit of residential now and then.
In the Ottawa and Montreal area and in between, or in that geographic area, or do you guys go wider than that as well?
We do some work in Gatineau,
Okay.
but primarily here in the Ottawa office.
Okay.
We work around Ottawa,
Perfect.
the valley.
Nice.
Yeah.
And where did you go to school?
I went to the University of Guelph. I graduated in 2016
Nice.
from the
I'm trying to get a couple of University of Guelph landscape professors on the podcast as well.
Oh,
So
that'd be cool.
if you're from University of Guelph and you want to be on the podcast, let me know. Anyway, we'll jump right into the questions. So what changes do you see trending in landscape architecture?
I'd say there's a lot of trends that have been in landscape architecture for a while now that aren't necessarily new, but they're really kind of coming to light now and
Okay.
getting more prominence. So right now the environment, climate change is
Absolutely.
more relevant than ever. So there's a lot of trends that go along with that. We're seeing green infrastructure is huge right now. Blue roof technology.
Okay.
We're seeing
What's blue roof technology? I know green roof technology, but I don't think I've ever heard blue roof before.
Blue roof is just capturing water on on rooftops, so in cisterns and things like that. So making the use of it through water harvesting from rainwater.
Oh, okay.
We're seeing permeable hardscapes is a real big thing now.
Right.
So getting rainwater to infiltrate back into the ground.
Right. Instead of running off into the sewers and
Absolutely,
drains.
yeah.
That makes sense.
We're seeing a lot of focus on protecting endangered and species at risk.
Okay.
So creating artificial habitats and things like that.
Nice.
So yeah, the environment is a real big topic right now, but from a social and heritage perspective, I'd say we're seeing more and more, especially here in Canada.
Right. And primarily in the Ottawa area with all the historical background around the area.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're also seeing indigenous work as indigenous reconciliation is a real big topic we're seeing. So we've had the pleasure to work with the Algonquins of Ontario here
Nice.
in our office, the AOO. So they're a group that represents the 10 Algonquin groups here in Ottawa.
Nice.
And Ontario. So the groups who've been living here in Ottawa for thousands of years now, making sure their voices are heard. So when we're working with them, we're really focused on listening to what they have to say and really kind of putting the pencil in their hands, seeing what they can come up with to voice what needs to be heard.
Nice.
So that's from environmental and social. Accessibility wise, we're seeing a real focus on inclusivity right now. So especially things like playgrounds, we're seeing people in the past weren't always necessarily included in things like playgrounds where groups like with sensory disabilities or developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
So in the past we've had playgrounds with ramps all over the place, and which is awesome, and it's great to see that inclusiveness. But as well, we're focusing on different groups now. So I'd say that's one thing that is really kind of coming to light in recent years. Economically, we're seeing groups like developers are really focusing on putting investment into their landscapes.
Right.
They want to.
I think in the past they kind of just made the investment mostly on the building structure, and then it was kind of like, an afterthought on the landscape. But it's nice to see it going the other way where they're combining the two together.
Exactly, yeah. Just here in Ottawa, one thing we're seeing a lot of is developers are building underground parking in places where decades ago wouldn't really have been a consideration because of the cost. It's really expensive to build, but they keep on doing it, and the reason is they want to have above ground landscapes that are used for things like recreation, and they see that as an investment opportunity. So that's really exciting for landscape architects.
Awesome.
So yeah, we talked about environment, social. I'd say technology-wise, there's a lot of huge advancements right now that we're really seeing in the industry. We're seeing things like surveying with drones.
Really?
Is a big thing now.
Okay.
So drones can go above, capture huge landscapes for
That makes sense.
accurately, and so that's a real advancement. In the construction industry, there's a lot of automation going on, so eliminating repetitive tasks, and so that's kind of revolutionizing the construction industry.
Right. One of my guests in the past was mentioning a return on, in his office anyway, to sketching, and I noticed that you guys do a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
Here as well, as opposed to just straight AutoCAD and technology.
Yeah, there's a real kind of organic humanness to actually drawing something on a piece of paper rather than sitting in AutoCAD and drawing it. So I think it's always been a big part of landscape architecture, but I think I'd say it's fair to say there's a return to it as well.
Nice.
I'd say, speaking of software as well, BIM software is something that landscape architecture is going to see more and more of as the years progress. So that's something that's kind of become standard in architecture, and I think landscape architecture is somewhat following trend in that sense. Because it's not quite as much of a necessity in landscape architecture compared to architecture.
Correct.
But along with that, I'd say virtual reality is something that's kind of coming up now. So it's kind of introducing a whole new way for us to experience design, for clients to experience design.
So they can actually sort of feel like they're actually in the finished product.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, that's kind of an extension of 3D modeling, which is something that landscape architecture has been involved with for a while now. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. Well,
you certainly got lots of technology-based companies in the Ottawa area to pull from a resource standpoint.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd say another thing we're seeing from a public safety perspective is a real focus on security. Especially a lot of the projects we're working on here in Ottawa, that's something that is really a main consideration. We're doing a project right now in Toronto where protection against vehicle ramming is one of the main things that we're talking about. So unfortunately, events like the Toronto van attack that happened
on Yonge Street
last year. So that brings up the question, how can we introduce these security features into the landscape in a way that's a bit more natural, and people don't feel like they're walking into a fortress when they walk onto the site. So that's a challenge for sure.
Absolutely.
Protecting against terrorist attacks. So, I think we've covered.
I think you've covered a lot. That's great.
There's hundreds more that I'm not thinking of right now, but
great. And then, how would you best describe the difference between residential and commercial from a landscape design standpoint?
I'd say that residential is a lot more personal when you're working on it, when it's actually a homeowner who owns it and it's their
do you find that they get more involved in the process as opposed to a commercial application?
I would say there's more of a personal involvement. Often planting is more of a consideration. Planting design having more variety, whereas you see a lot of commercial projects where there's a pretty simple planting palette that can be nice. It can be kind of a simple look, but it also brings up issues if something goes wrong with one of the plants and they all go. I'd say there's typically more stakeholders involved for commercial projects compared to residential, where you're maybe working with a few. But that's not always to say, because sometimes, like we just did a project here in Ottawa, which is a big residential building. And so residential, it doesn't always mean just a single family house.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
But so yeah, typically more stakeholders involved on commercial, typically bigger budgets on commercial
Sure.
projects. So
Yeah.
that opens up a new can of worms, kind
Right.
of.
Perfect. And what challenges that do you see facing the industry as it stands now?
I'd say value engineering is a big issue that a lot of landscape
Sure.
architects face. Unfortunately, often the landscape is the first thing on the chopping block
Right.
when budgets are cut. So that can be a real challenge in the industry. I'd say just economic turmoil in general.
Right.
The design industry can be fairly sensitive to that. So that's a big concern. I'd say another big one is just kind of a public understanding
Mhm.
of what it is that landscape architects do. Which,
Yeah, you don't just cut grass, right?
despite common belief, yeah, I've been asked that many times.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I went to university to cut grass.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think getting more of an understanding of what it is landscape architecture is all about could
Right.
really help the profession, as well as other design industries. So seeing us as more than a group who just comes in at the end of the project
Right.
and throws shrubs in the ground. So
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason there isn't much of a public understanding of what it is we do is that landscape architects kind of we all have different perceptions of what landscape architecture is. It's
Right.
not quite as clear cut as a lot of professions in some senses. So
Well, you kind of have to cross multiple facets in multiple industries, mechanical, structural, building architecture, and sort of combine that whole thing together as
exactly.
more of a generalist and then a specialist.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah. So we're really generalists, having basic understanding of a lot of different principles
Right.
rather than focusing on a lot of a few individual things. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then what role, kind of leads right into the next question,
Hmm.
how do you see your role in landscape architecture when working with building designers and contractors?
So we work with a lot of architects, we work with civil engineers, structural engineers, as well as contractors. So I'd say when we're working with other consultants and other design teams, having an integrated approach is really the main focus that we're trying to achieve, is having good communication with them, making sure that they're aware of how our design is progressing, we're aware of how their drawings are progressing, so that when it all comes together in the end, it all jives and it all
Right.
works together. Working with contractors, I think one of the main things we're focused on is just providing clarity through
Sure.
our working
Yeah,
drawings,
that's
and
very
making
important,
sure that everything that we send out to them is very concise. And it's I think we in the design industry, we need to have kind of some empathy to the other professionals. So contractors, when they're out on site and they're looking at our drawings and the wind's blowing and it's raining and they're trying to understand, it can be hard when you're taking a first look and they're actually the ones who need to do it. So
Right.
So I guess when we're here in our office, we really try to put ourselves in their shoes and see how they're going to see our drawings when they're out on site and need to do the work. So
Nice.
I'd say contractors, in a lot of sense, don't always get the credit they deserve in terms of how knowledgeable they are
Right.
and how well they know things go together, because they really need to have that knowledge.
Do you get, as a sort of, when the drawings go out, do you get any sort of interaction or have an opportunity to have interaction with the contractors before the drawings are done? Do you invite them in to discuss, here's my thought, do you think this is going to work on this site?
We've talked to contractors before to when we know the contractor who's going to be doing the project, just to familiarize them with what's happening and making sure that we're on the same page in that sense.
Makes sense.
And then during the construction admin phase, we're out there and trying to help them solve
Site
any
meetings and
problems
be on
that
site
come
for
up.
it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So the last question I've got for you as a relatively new landscape architect, what advice would
Landscape architectural designer.
Okay. In the landscape industry, let's say, what feedback would you offer to someone who's looking at landscape architecture design as a career opportunity?
It's a good question. I would say I would recommend going to a landscape architecture office, or maybe going to a municipality and speaking with the landscape architect and
Yeah.
just kind of getting a feel for what it is we actually do.
Right.
Because like I was talking about earlier, it's one of these professions where it's, even when you're getting into it, it takes a while to figure out what's it's really all about.
Right.
So I would say speaking with someone who's already in the industry could go a long way to get a feel for what it's all about.
Right.
I'd say beforehand, it's good to have an interest in the outdoors.
Right.
An interest in drawing is a good thing to have. You don't need to be able to draw to be a landscape architect, but I'd say it does help.
Sure.
Having an understanding that it does involve a lot of indoor work as well. It's not, you have to enjoy being both inside and outside.
Right.
I'd say that's an important thing.
Yeah,
to
for a lot of people,
going
that's a nice balance to have that instead of being in an office all day. There is the opportunity of doing some outdoor, some site meetings and working on a site with contractors and owners and reps.
Absolutely,
Cool.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
No problem. And for all the people that follow us, this will be uploaded onto my LinkedIn profile and also onto YouTube and Twitter. So thanks for following. If you have any questions, please place them in the comments, and we'll see you on episode 8.